Coding problems part 4. This video will include 4 programming problems to solve. So the first programming problem is about this array list. Now what we have to do is we have to get each number from this array, and we're going to have to multiply and get the resultant product, and then we have to print out the resultant product. So there are a lot of methods to do this, but I'm going to use a for loop to do this problem. So I'm going to use a for loop, and I'm going to get an input like index as 0. I'm going to go all the way to the length of the array, so I could say r.length. This is present in Java, so we could just increment using plus plus, and then we could create a variable which will store the results. So we could just say result, and we could set it as 1. If we set it as 0, it's always going to result as 0, because multiplying numbers with 0, which will always result in 0. But when we have a 1, then it's in the proper solution. So over here we could have result, and we have an asterisk equals to, and then we could have the array and sub index. So it's just going to go one at a time. Once it's done, we could print out using system.out.print. So print and ln, and then we could just say answer, whatever fancy stuff we need, plus, and then put the result right there. Once we're done, let's go to compiling and running the code. So we could go cls, and now we could say java c product.java, compiled successfully, and ran. So it gave us a result of 120, which is correct answer. When we multiply 1 with 2, which is 2, and then 2 multiplied by 3 is 6. 6 multiplied by 4, which is 20, 6, 12, 18, 24, and then 24 multiplied by 5, which is obviously 120. Alright, so the next problem we have is remove duplicates. So we have this list over here which contains a lot of duplicate numbers, and our job here is to create an independent list that only contains the unique numbers. So we have to remove every single duplicate value. So we're going to use Python for this, and you could do this in almost any other language of your choice. But I'm going to do Python. So what we're going to do is create a function called remove duplicates. So let me just create my function. So I'll say duplicates. And right when I'm done with the function, I could just pass it right now, temporarily. And what I'm going to think about what should I do. First, I'm going to create a list, and I'm going to call this as my new list. So I'm going to say new list, and I'm just going to make it empty. And I'm going to use a for loop to go through this existing list. So initially we're going to be calling this list. So we're going to use remove duplicates. So we're going to say remove duplicates. And we're going to be passing in this list. So once we're passing in this thing, we need to put an input parameter here. So an input parameter as lst will be over here. And the thing here, the difference between this is an argument, and then this is the input parameter here. So once we're done with that, we're going to use a for loop. So it's going to say for number in the list, and we put a colon here, and we're going to have to put a condition. The condition is if the number not in the new list, so I'll say new lst, and then we put the append function. So we're saying new list lst dot append, and we put the number inside of that. So we're done. We have a residual list that contains just unique numbers. So once we're done with that, we could move here, shift tab, and now we could return the new list. So once we're done with that, we could print that out here. So here we could just say new one, and this is just gonna contain the list, and then we could just print it out using new one. And now let's go to our command terminal, and let's just run the code. So we'll say Python, and I'll say remove duplicates. So duplicates.python, and there you go. We have a list that contains just individual numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the old list had these duplicates. So if you guys know any other solution to this, probably in another language like Java. So in Java, there's a thing called a hash set that can only contain unique numbers. So you could implement that. So if you know a better solution, or if you know another implementation, then you could write the code and put it in the comment sections, and then I could check it out, and possibly we could help each other out. Our next job here is to flatten this 2D array. So we have this in Python, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to create this in a linear fashion. This 2D array is really irregular. We have one set which has 3 elements, and then it has 2 elements in another set and 1 element in another set. So what we have to do is we have to create it and flatten it up and create it in a linear fashion. So we're going to use Python for this, and we're going to create a function. So I'm going to call this function, I'm going to say define, and I'm going to say flatten, and I'm going to accept a list, and I'm going to pass for now. So I'm going to pass. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to call this thing. So I'm going to say flatten, and I'm going to pass in the list. So what's going to happen here is that we're going to create a new list first. So we're going to say new list again, and we're going to create this empty. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a for loop again. So I'm going to say list item in LST. And now we know that the list item is going to be the set, right? So this is set, set, set. There's 3 sets here. So I'm going to go and traverse through in the set. So I'm going to say for another, and I'll say number in the set. So list item set. We could just call this as list item. And this is going to traverse inside, and I'm going to append the number. Now it's going to result in a num. So num means like number. So 1, 2, whatever those numbers are, all of them are going to be accessed, and I'm going to append them inside of my new list. So this could be done in C++, in Java, and all other languages by getting the length, right? So length of the first one, length of the second one, and then append them. So we're done with this, and now we're going to go back, and we're going to return the list. So we're going to say return the list. No semicolons in Python. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say new one again, and then we could print that new baby here. So new one right here, and let's go and just run it. So first of all, we're going to say Python flatten 2d.py, and there you go. We had this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is new one, and it just returned the list. So I made a mistake here. What we're going to have to return is the new list. So we're going to say new LST, and now we're going to get the newly created list. So this was the list that was irregular, and now if I call this, we have a list that is in sequential manner. Problem solved. All right, so here's a challenge. We're in Java, and now our task here is to get this list or this array, whatever. And now we're going to get this array, and we're going to try to get the most number of consecutive zeros. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to get this list, and I'm going to pass it inside of a function, and the function is just going to find the most number of consecutive zeros in this. So in this case we have 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So this is going to be it should appear 6 as the answer over here. So over here this is 2 consecutive, and this is 1. So over here 6 is the answer. But in this case, how we're going to do this? Let's start problem solving. The first case here is that I'm going to create an index I and D, and I'm going to assign it to 0, and I'm going to pass this inside of a function what I said. So I'm going to say the function that I'm going to be using is called max zeros. So I'm going to say max zeros, and I'm going to pass my array inside and the index inside as well. And this function, what I'm going to be defining, is going to be recursive. So inside here, first of all, we're going to create our function. And in Java, we're going to have to first write the keyword static. This means that I could use this independently without creating an object of the class. So int static, so it's a static int max zeros function. And inside of this is we're going to be accepting an array, like what we're doing over there, and we're accepting an int, and I'm going to call this as the index I. So the first case here I'm going to be checking is if that I, the index, is less than the array.length. So if it's more, then you definitely don't need to do anything. So if it's less, you have to go inside of this body. And what we're going to do inside the body is we're going to put another condition. And now the fun part comes where we say array sub I, which is the first number inside of this array list. So the first number inside of this array, if that equals to 0, right, we're going to actually have a variable count, and it's going to increment its value plus plus, meaning it's going to increment 1 by 1 and 1. And for that case, I also need to have another variable here. So before my function declaration of max zeros, I'm going to create another static keyword, and I'm going to use the static keyword, and I'm going to say int, and I'm going to call this as count, and this is going to be 0. So I'm going to use count, and I'm going to say 0 over here. I'm also going to create another one. So I'm going to tell you why I'm creating this another one. It's going to be called most, and it's also going to be equal to 0. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to say if it was 0, the count will be incremented plus, meaning it's going to increment to 1. And then what we're going to do is if the count, so if we see that a count is basically greater than the most. So if the count is greater than or equal to the most, we're going to assign that to the most, because oftenly we're going to be changing our most variable because we're trying to find the most consecutive number, right? So we're going to say most, and we're going to say equals to count, semicolon. We're done with that. And if these conditions don't apply, so we could say else, if that means that the first number is not 0, then we could say count is equal to 0. So this means that there is no 0 spotted. Now I'm going to recall, so I'm going to be calling my function max zeros again and again. So I'm going to say max zeros, and I'm going to say this time I'm going to say the array, but the index will be incremented by 1. And over here, notice we have some problem here. It says that this method must return a result of type int. So we're going to be returning that in the bottom portion here. So once we're going to recall this, it's going to check again. It's going to be checking the second index, which is 1, the third index, which is 2, the fourth index, which is 3, and so on, until we reach the length. So once we reach the length, we could just do something else. And over here we have this condition where we have to specify that if the I index is equal to the array.length, meaning the last element, minus 1, if it's equal to the last element, we have to return out the most value, which was the most occurring one. So we could just say return most. In that case, we're done. And then in the other case where if it doesn't even match, meaning the length was just random, so it's just going to return out 0. So it's going to say return, I'm just going to say over here. So I'm going to say return most. So in two cases we did it. So first case, if it goes traversing all the way to the end successfully, we could return out the most, and definitely it could be any kind of value. If the I is greater than the array.length, then we're going to return the most, and then it's going to be probably a different value. Now when we call our function, we're going to have to put it inside a variable, so we can say answer. Now let's print out the value by system.out.println, and we could just say most, and we could say plus ans, semicolon. And in this case, we're going to have the value of 6. So let's see, CLS, we're going to say Java C, and we say most zeros.java, and it's compiled successfully, Java most zeros, and there you go, we got the most as 6. Perfect. Let's try another case here. So if I have, let's say, another 0 right here, and now it's supposed to give us 7. So CLS, recompiling, and then running, and we get the most of 7. Although this is not the best solution, and possibly there are going to be tons of solutions that are better than mine, but remember, this is just like one of the solutions to it. So if you have a better solution, then always let me know.